planner with the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, and I work with the treatment committee. I'm staff to the treatment committee and the certification panel. And so, as Chief Judge mentioned, we approved the most recent revisions to the Domestic Violence Intervention standards. And that change wasn't just updates, but it represented more of a paradigm shift in how we do domestic violence intervention. And so we're gonna go over a little bit of the changes, but more so focusing on a big picture and why we changed and what led us there. Because I don't think anyone wants us to go through the 30 pages here. Some of you that worked on this process, they're shaking their heads like, please don't make us do this again. It was a very, very long journey, starting in 2016, and so I'm gonna go over a little bit of that. I am reluctantly sharing a little bit about myself. I will probably regret this picture later, but this is me in college. I studied abroad in Costa Rica when I was finishing my public health program at Temple. And I had the opportunity to work with a group that was engaging men to address domestic violence, and they were using indigenous practices. And so that was one of my first opportunities to really see what a program that is culturally centered and is engaging men in a different way, in a way that speaks to their culture. And that's really what drove my passion for inclusive and diverse programming.
Hi, my name is Bailey. I am an intern at the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, and I'm a University of Delaware senior. I started my Domestic Violence Prevention and Services program about 2 years ago now, and I've been with the DVCC for a year, and I've helped Sarah draft the Domestic Violence Intervention Standards since the summer, and it's been a really good journey. So the timeline of the Domestic Violence Intervention Standards started in 1994. Those were the first standards that were drafted in Delaware, and then in 2012 came the first revisions, and then in 2023 is when we came up with the current revisions. And then one of the graphics that we added to the document started with the referrals that came from the court and parole. This is just the process for offenders that they go through, and ends with the evaluation outcome, which usually results in a recommendation for domestic violence intervention. So the purpose of the standards is to have a coordinated community response and provides transparency and consistency throughout the state. Currently there are no national standards, but Delaware is one of 48 states that provides their own state standards. So there are limitations to the standards. There's no guarantee of accountability or of stopping abuse, but studies do suggest that there are positive results from domestic violence intervention, so that's why we have them. So some of the major components that are in the document include system, process, and flow, evaluation procedures and outcomes, accountability to victims, coordinated community response, intervention modalities, core competencies, discharge procedures, contraindicated methods, and certification and staff requirements. So another thing that we added when creating the new revision was the importance of language. We changed batterers intervention to domestic violence intervention. We removed the heteronormative pronouns, and we also removed the rhetoric of same-sex couples to include the entirety of the LGBTQ+ community.
So what actually led us to change? So as I mentioned, that this process started in 2016 with a evaluation study. And so there are multiple factors along the way that contributed, including the pandemic, which impacted just the process but also staff changes, and then within programs, shifting how programs operate. But with the evaluation study in 2016, the goal was to research the efficacy of the programs and make recommendations for improvement. So there were several key findings, and this document, it's a 2017 evaluation report. It's on our website if anyone loves research like I do and wants to dig in and read through. But I wanted to highlight a couple of the findings because when we were looking at the 2012 Domestic Violence Intervention Standards that this evaluation was based on, we were at a point where we were already seeing some success and some change and some notable changes, some effects from the study. So when we started this revision process, it started off of we were seeing great things, but we knew we needed to improve in the areas that we wanted to improve. So two key findings that I wanted to point out, one of which was looking at rearrest rates for those that participated in intervention programs versus those that did not. And those that, between 2012 and in year 2013, those that participated in intervention programs had lower rearrest rates than those that did not. And we know that rearrest rates and recidivism rates do not tell the full story. So we also, the evaluation incorporated what's called the Batters Intervention Proximal Program Outcome Survey, say that really fast, BIPROS for short. And so this is a survey assessment tool that can look at attitudes and motivation towards change. So it's looking at theory of change and incorporating that specifically with the curriculum. So when participants are walking through the classes, what is usually referred to as domestic violence classes, the groups, it is in those moments where they're going through the curriculum and learning key topics such as power and control and the effects of abuse, accountability, and these are where we want to see change in their attitudes and motivation, these specific topics. And so this evaluation study showed some significant impacts related to some of those topics. So again, we were seeing some great things, but there were recommendations of where can we improve. So after we finished I said we like I was here, most of you in this room, but after the treatment committee finished the evaluation, there was technical assistance from the Center for Justice Innovation, and I know many of you are probably familiar with their work, but to look at the recommendations from that survey and to see if we can find some goals and a pathway to implement some of those recommendations. And so on the screen, if you're looking, there are a few recommendations. It's not all of them, but these are some things that we highlighted as focus areas. One of the other aspects too is that with the Center for Justice Innovation, they have guiding principles that they have created for effective abuser intervention programming. And so they helped us align the work that we were doing and what we wanted to improve on with their principles. So not only are we looking at, building off of the recommendations from an evaluation, but we were mirroring and aligning the improvements that we wanted to make with their guiding principles. And so a couple of the focus within the changes, we were looking at increasing the number of providers. And so this had us looking at how we were doing certification and provider requirements. And then prioritizing training approaches for working with diverse communities. This was critical because as when I mentioned the group that I served in Costa Rica, we know that the impact when you have programming that can be culturally relevant and that can reach specific communities. And then looking at other intervention models, you'll see a lot of this today. A lot of these, how we looked at different models. We looked at Colorado and other states because we weren't going to reinvent the wheel. But we looked at what other states were doing, and Colorado specifically has a domestic violence risk assessment, and they look at when they conduct offender programming, they look at the outcomes from that, so they're able to tailor different levels of treatment based on the evaluation. So that was one thing that we looked at. And then incorporating trauma work in intervention, and this is something that we know the impact of trauma. And acknowledging someone's trauma history within intervention doesn't diminish or doesn't dismiss the abuse, but it does help us to connect, because if you don't see the whole person, we can't heal the whole person, we can't help the whole person. And so we want our programs to be effective. We want them to reach people. We want them to be able to meet specific needs, because everybody in Delaware is not the same. We all have different backgrounds. There are various different communities within Delaware. So we want our programs to reflect the diversity in the communities that we're serving. So when Bailey and I picked up over the summer, after all of this work was done, we were really looking at an overall literature review of like, what does the research say with outcomes with offender and domestic violence intervention. And this is hard to look at because, as you know, we looked at with the evaluation report, that was only done on men. So that's kind of a consistent thing that we saw, is that there are a lot of research that is done in the domestic violence intervention field that is primarily done on men, cisgendered, white, heterosexual men specifically. And so that leaves us with acknowledging gaps. A significant gap that we saw with the research in the queer and LGBTQI population. And then when you're looking at research and recognizing that there is gaps when research is conducted to when practice can actually happen in the community. So that means evaluating provider input and community knowledge as critical when we're improving programs. And so you're gonna see that today as providers talk about what they were seeing and the changes that they made within their programs. So our common theme, this led us to what the overall arching common theme was, which was moving away from and beyond a one-size-fits-all approach. We knew that we had key components that were good, but when we created the standards, having the ability to leave room for flexibility for innovation, to leave room for flexibility for providers to tailor their curriculums and their model around the communities that they're serving. So state standards are meant to be a guide. They're meant to have boundaries within what we know is effective, because we don't want programs to operate with what we know is not effective or harmful. And so we are moving beyond a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to domestic violence intervention, because quality intervention is an important piece with addressing victim safety. We know that, and we know that it's not the only piece. It takes all of us in this room, but we must reach the communities that we're serving. And so we believe that domestic violence intervention can be both restorative and healing for the individual, while also prioritizing accountability and safety for survivors, families, and communities.